I'm Woody, and this is another one in our series, Exploring the Mysteries. Tonight we'll talk about, is there life out there, meaning beyond Earth? Since 1947, we have been inundated by UFO sightings. It really started in that year when a private pilot from the West Coast was flying around a mountain, and he reported seeing something that he said looked like a flying saucer. The name caught on. Then in 1947, we had the incident at Roswell, New Mexico, where a news report was released that said a flying saucer had crashed there. About a day later, another story came out saying it was a weather balloon. But from then on, we've had sighting after sighting reported, sometimes by individuals, sometimes by many, many people. I have never seen a flying saucer, but I have known people who have claimed to have. Are they real? Are they imagined? Let me give you an example of the sighting that I made. Let's take a look at the chart over here, the top part of it. I was flying on an aircraft, on a commercial airliner, and if I were sitting here, this is the wing of the plane, and I looked out and I saw two lights. They were following. One was right above the other. And I watched this for a long time. And I thought, what is this? Then I realized we were flying in a northward direction, which would mean that I was looking west. It was night, the sun had set. I was seeing the planet Venus and the planet Mercury. If I hadn't have been an astronomer, I wouldn't have recognized what that meant. I would have thought for sure I had seen them following. Well, let's look at this scientifically, and then we'll talk about some of the sightings later. We have to start out by, what does life mean? What is it? Define it. Scientists have a hard time defining life, so we define it as life as we know it. That's not a very precise definition at all. But what that means is the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle is something that contains RNA and DNA molecules. These molecules of carbon can form long chains, and this produces organic matter, and this is what we're made of. That is what we call life. Now, in the 1950s, experiments were started to try and reproduce life. These experiments took the situations that existed on Earth, or we thought existed on Earth millions of years ago, and put them together and see what happened. So we had first water vapor, H2O, hydrogen, oxygen, methane, CH4, carbon, hydrogen, ammonia, NH4, nitrogen, hydrogen, and then lightning. To reproduce lightning, they used high voltage sparks. And what happened here? Actually, amino acids were produced. Amino acids are considered to be the building blocks of life. So it was a very exciting experiment. But what does it mean? Amino acids themselves are not life, although they have been found in meteorites that come from outer space. So it is possible that whatever this process is that's going on that produces amino acids is going on in our galaxy and probably our whole universe. But even DNA itself does not mean life. Scientists are not qualified to say what supplies the spark of life. That's what they call it, the spark of life. We can have this thing called the carbon cycle. When our bodies die, we are still the same material. They will deteriorate after a while, but right after we have died, the material is still the same, but there is no life in the body. So, what is life? I'm going to read something from Stephen Hawking. He wrote this in 1988. He's one of the world's renowned astrophysicists. And he said this: Up to now, most scientists have been too occupied with the development of new theories that describe what the universe is to ask the question why. And that is true. We have been busy finding out, well, what makes it tick? What's going on? Then he goes on to say, on the other hand, the people whose business it is to ask why, the philosophers, have not been able to keep up with the advances of scientific theory. And this is probably true too. However, if we do discover a complete theory, it should in time be understandable in broad principles by everyone. Then we shall all of us, be able to take part in the discussion of the question of why it is that we and the universe exist. If we find the answer to that, it will be the ultimate triumph of human reason, for then we will know the mind of God. That's from Stephen Hawking. I might add some of my own thoughts on that. I don't know if science will ever come up with that. However, some religious people have an answer to it now, and I'll give you what their answer is to this, the why. The why is we are here to grow and develop and progress and return to the Creator that made us. This is definitely not a scientific explanation, but it's very interesting. Now I'd like to look at other possibilities of what life is beside the carbon cycle. There are others. We'll go to science fiction first. There have been movies made, The Matrix was one. There have been books written on this. Will computers become life, reproduce themselves, and take over? Where does this come from, this concept? Computers are made of silicon chips. There is something called the silicon cycle. It works like the carbon cycle in that silicon can bond with other atoms and form long molecular chains, just the same as carbon does. But silicon doesn't do it as well. Apparently, carbon is the best function that we know of for life forms as they exist now. Then I come up with a speculation, and you might have seen the movie Star Trek, in which it was in. Are we to computers as God is to us, and will computers start seeking the Creator, as they did in the movie Star Trek? Just interesting thought. I have no idea. Well, another digression on this as to what is life. Since scientists can't answer what it is, I thought I would look for some other explanations in other places, and there's some very interesting ones. One of these comes from Egypt in the time of the pharaohs. Apparently there was a period of time where a pharaoh had to have a near-death experience to become a pharaoh. So they produced it. And how did they do it? They would put them in a coffin, seal the coffin with wax so no air could get in. They would actually asphyxiate and die. Then they would open the coffin and resuscitate them. If they lived, they were pharaoh. And I have to wonder, well, how many would-be pharaohs didn't make it? How did they come up with the length of time in which a person would die and not come back, or which they would just, their heart would stop beating, then they could bring them back? I don't know. But they did record some things in these experiences. They record a tunnel leading to light, and that sounds sort of familiar. They record seeing dead relatives. They record traveling to different places. They record a review of their life. All of these are the same characteristics that we find in near-death experiences today. One has to wonder about this. I speculated then, okay, if this is true, if this history that I read really did happen, is this why pharaohs were thought of as gods? Because they had seen the other side. Intriguing, but it leads to something else in terms of other life forms. The Egyptians had some interesting writings and some interesting concepts about life and death. They had a book called, which we call now, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And it described what dying would be like, and they would read this to dying people. Now, this is unlike the way we do today. We sterilize it, we put people away in white rooms. There's a taboo on death. As Freud said, we're doing away with the taboo on sex. We still have a taboo on death. We don't deal with it very well. So they were dealing with things like this. And out of my readings came something else. About the time that the Abraham that was in the Bible, which was about 4,000 years ago, was in Egypt, there was a writing on a scroll that was placed in a mummy case. It was sent over to the United States in the 1830s. A museum had it, and they translated it from this scroll, and the scroll was called the Book of Abraham. Now, I'm going to read some of that to you because it's fascinating. Think of it in terms of other life forms and astrophysics, and remember that it was written 4,000 years ago. Now the Lord had shown unto me, Abraham, the intelligences that were organized before the world was. Now, if you look at that and take it in its context, as it says, that was a long, long time ago. And among all of these, there were many of the noble and great ones. And God saw these souls, that they were good. And he stood in the midst of them, and he said, These I will make my rulers, for he stood among those that were spirits. Now we're talking about a potential other life form than the carbon cycle or the silicon cycle, whatever a spirit is. And he saw that they were good, and he said unto me, Abraham, thou wast chosen before thou wast born. Now we're talking about life before birth, not life after death. And there stood one among them that was like unto God, and he said unto those who were with him, We will go down, for there is space there. Now we get into astrophysics. And we will take these materials, and we will make an earth, whereon these may dwell. I find this very interesting reading. We tend in some of our ways to think that these people thousands of years ago, they were primitive, they didn't know much, they were just shepherds wandering around the fields. And just from that writing, it shows that they knew a lot. I have read this book from cover to cover, and there is some real astrophysics in it that deals with time and space and the rotation of planets governing time, things like that. Okay, let's go back to science of today and life out there. We know there is life in our solar system because we exist on Earth. Are there other solar systems? That's a very good question, and 100 years ago, we didn't have the answer for that. We have the answer now, and it is absolutely yes, there are. Well, how do we know this? We don't have telescopes powerful enough to see planets that are orbiting other suns. But let's go to our chart over here and look at something else. What we can detect is this. A star wobbles. Now, not all stars wobble, but over time it will move back and forth like this. What that says is there is something orbiting it, because the gravity of whatever is orbiting the sun is moving it. It's very infinitesimal, and until recently we didn't have instruments that could measure that delicate a movement. But we know now that that happens. We also know that it happens many times. We're finding more and more of these suns that wobble, meaning more and more of them have planets. And by measuring the amount of the wobble, we can tell the size of the planet. Some of them are about the size of Jupiter that have been found. Now, as we get more and more delicate instruments, we are finding some that are about the size of Earth. So, yes, there are planets out there. There are solar systems of some sort. Now, Hubble has found something else, and let's go back to our chart. This is a depiction of it, but the Hubble telescope has found a star with matter orbiting around it. Now, this isn't planets. This is just a dust cloud. But it's quite possible that this is the formation of another solar system. We don't know for sure, but it could be. Well, let's look then at our next possibility here. Let's go into statistics and formulas and see if we can come up with a probability that life exists in our galaxy. This is called the Drake equation. And Carl Sagan used it to estimate the number of societies that were out there in our galaxy, and I'll give you that number later. If we go back to the chart, we find there are 5 basic factors. It's called the Drake equation. The 5 factors in this equation are: is a star suitable for life to form? Not all stars are. For example, giant stars, the big ones, they live about 1/1000th of the time that our sun lives. They're short-lived, they blow up, they're violent, and they're gone. This is probably not a good possibility for life. Okay, there are some others. Let's look at the chart again. We have double stars, or sometimes triple stars. The question is, do they have planets at all? One of the theories is if you have multiple stars or suns out there, you actually have the matter is all concentrated in those suns that are close together and no planets formed. Or if they did form, what would their orbit be like? We go back to the chart and just a possibility of it. If we have 2 suns, and let's just take one planet is orbiting, the gravitational pull will get really weird when the planet comes around between the suns, and they may cross over into a figure 8, or it may go like this. Whatever it is, the gravitational pull will be so wild that probably nothing could live on that planet. So what does this leave us with? It leaves us with single, small stars like our sun. We have lots of those around. I would make an estimate of that 10% of the stars in our galaxy are suitable for life. I think that's a low estimate. The second question in this Drake equation is, does the star have planets? Well, we know some of them do. I'll give another estimate, which is probably low. I'll say 20% of the suitable stars have planets, and I suspect it's higher. All right, we have some probabilities there. The next question, are the planets suitable for life? Aha. Now, I have made an estimate of 20% of them are. And what is that based on? That's based on our solar system, that the Earth is obviously suitable for life. And we're looking for life on Mars right now. I believe that life once existed on Mars. I don't know quite what its form was. But there are 2 planets out of 8 or 9, depending upon what you want to call Pluto, that are possible for life formation. Let's look at the rest of them. Back to the chart. I've given some data here on the different planets, and at the same time you will see photographs of each one of these planets as we go through this. The first planet nearest the Sun is Mercury. Mercury is hot as anything, 800 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's cold as anything, minus 280. Well, what does that mean? When it's facing the sun, it's hot. When it's away from the sun, it's cold. You have the cold of space out there. It has a thin sodium atmosphere. And from the picture that you see, it is not very hospitable for life. The next planet out from the sun is Venus. Now, Venus is a lot like Earth in that it's about the same size and the same mass, but from there on, the similarities cease. Venus does something very strange. It's a retrograde planet, meaning it spins in the opposite direction from all the rest of them. Now, if the theory of the creation of the solar system is that everything spun off from the sun, everything should be spinning in the same direction. So there's an anomaly. We find the temperature, though, of Venus, 900 degrees Fahrenheit, is even hotter than Mercury, which is closer. Why? Because of something we call the greenhouse effect. The atmosphere of Venus is carbon dioxide. We are afraid that this is happening to Earth. Carbon dioxide lets sunlight in, but it doesn't let heat out. And so the planet just keeps getting hotter and hotter. Also, Venus is not very hospitable because of its clouds. Sulfuric acid, H2SO4. You wouldn't like battery acid raining on you, and it would feel something like that. So it is not a good place. Our probes and the Russian probes of Venus have not lasted very long at all once they got into that atmosphere. Well, next we have Earth. Earth is, in many places, very hospitable. It is between minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit and plus 120. It has an atmosphere of nitrogen and oxygen, with a few other things in there, but basically that's it. It's a beautiful looking planet. The astronauts first filmed Earth from outer space, and those shots they sent back were just magnificent. We had never seen them before. The next planet out is Mars. Now, Mars, there's been speculation about life there for a long time. H.G. Wells wrote the book War of the Worlds, in which we were invaded by Mars. Well, what's it like there? Minus 190 degrees is the coldest temperature, depending upon where you are on the planet, and plus 80 degrees. Now, that's livable. But the atmosphere is not for humans, thin carbon dioxide. However, it was believed that there once was an atmosphere that was more hospitable. We're looking for life there now. We're on Mars at this very moment. We have been there before. And the photograph that you see was actually from 1976 when we were there first. Mars has riverbeds on it. To have riverbeds, you had to once have rivers. And to have rivers, that means water. Now, back in the old days, this was seen as channels. They believed there were canals, and so that's where the stories came up. There was life on Mars. If there was life, it's, I don't know what form it took, probably lower form than human, but I don't know. Now, the next four planets are not solid at all. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. They're all giant gas planets. They're cold, very cold, about approximately minus 250 degrees Fahrenheit. But there is some possibility here. You're going to see with Jupiter, beautiful planet. Jupiter has some solid moons that have volcanic activity that may produce enough heat so that there could be some kind of life under the surface. It is possible. Saturn, we like the beautiful picture of it with its rings. Those rings are nothing but matter broken up, moons that didn't form. Outside of that, you have 9 moons. Then we have Uranus, which has 5 moons, and 4 of them rotate retrograde. So we have some weird things happening in our solar system. Finally, we have Neptune, and it has 2 moons. So there is some possibility that there might be life on the moons of Jupiter. There could have been life on Mars, and there might be life still of some sort there. The furthest planet out, one has to question whether it's a planet or not, is Pluto. It is thought that it is an asteroid that was captured from somewhere because it's solid. We have 4 solid planets, 4 giant gas planets, and then Pluto that doesn't fit. Also, Pluto's orbit is weird. It doesn't fit either. Pluto has 1 moon, and the picture that you see is of Pluto and its moon, Charon, and that moon is about half the size of Pluto, so they're probably both asteroids and they orbit around each other. Okay, let's go back to the Drake equation now. That is where my 20% estimate comes from. The next part of the Drake equation is, after are planets suitable for life, how many suitable planets actually produce life? So let's go back again to the flip chart. How many suitable planets produce life? That's the big unknown. We don't know. And the final question, how long does a civilization exist before it destroys itself and isn't there anymore? That's one most people don't think about. Well, if we do the math from the Drake equation, in our galaxy, there are 200 billion stars. So we multiply that by 10%, 20%, and 20%, and what we come up with in our galaxy, there are at least 800 million planets suitable for life. What does that tell you statistically? Carl Sagan had something to say about that. He made some estimates on those other 2 that I didn't. He estimated that in our galaxy alone, there are 1 million technological societies. 1 million. And there are billions of galaxies out there. Well, this leads us to the question of contact. Did you see the movie? It was a great one. It was based on a book written by Carl Sagan. In Contact, radio communication was the principal way to try and see if there's life out there. And it is true. That is the major way that science is trying to find it, with radio telescopes. The assumption is that a technological society will have radio capability. It seems like a good assumption. We have been broadcasting here on Earth radio stations since 1920. So we have 84 years of radio waves going out into space. That means they have traveled by now 84 light years, because radio travels at the speed of light. And that takes in quite a few planets out there, or quite a few stars, and with some planets. Now, we are beaming messages to specific stars, and we are listening with radio telescope to hear any reply. Again, I say the problem is the time it takes to send a message and get it back. And science tells us with no known response. And I put quotes around that known. It is my opinion, if there was a known response, the government would not let us know it. And here is the reason I say this. This came from an astronomy book. There are dead stars out there called pulsars. They send messages. They send radio waves, actually. And they're spinning. They're giant stars that have blown up. And they're spinning very rapidly. And if they happen to be pointing in the right direction and spinning the right way, we will get radio waves from them. And they'll be very constant, absolutely constant. And they'll be very fast. The first one of these was found, I believe it was in the 1960s sometime. And they gave it a title, LGM, Little Green Men. Was this, they were asking, some kind of way station in the galaxy that was sending messages for navigation purposes. That was hushed up for 6 months until they found out what it was. And then the information was let out. That leads me to believe that for some reason the government would not want us to know it, because they didn't for a while on that one. As I have said, the problem with radio telescopes is time. The problem of space travel within our galaxy is time. How long it would take. According to Einstein's equation, you can't go faster. Matter cannot go faster than the speed of light. Weird things happen to it mathematically, and it just can't be. Actually, matter will get infinitely large in size at the speed of light. That's what the formulas say. So, how could we be visited? How could this happen? Are there close encounters? Now, let's get to some of those UFO reports. The scientific answer is this: no known extraterrestrials are on Earth. Or I might say, if they are, we don't know about it, because the government wouldn't tell us. The standard bureaucratical answer about UFO sightings is this, and we'll go to our chart. Take a look at it. No scientific evidence has been found to support flying saucers, and there is no use spending money looking for them. We need to spend it in other space explorations. That's the answer given. Then what are the explanations of all these tens of thousands of sightings? Well, you'll see some pictures of a few of them. One of them is swamp gas. Now, I don't have a picture for that. For some reason, probably methane, out of the swamps will come these balls of glowing gas. They should be more likely called ghost lights, and I think they fit more in parapsychology than they do astrophysics. But that's one of the reasons it's given. The next one is St. Elmo's fire. Now, this kind of thing can be reproduced by people on Earth. We can actually create this. It's also been called ball lightning. I have some pictures of this. St. Elmo's fire was produced in a microwave. Now, I don't know how it was done. I also have another picture of ball lightning, which looks really weird, as you can see. Lightning is doing strange things. St. Elmo's fire has been found, this ball lightning kind of stuff, and sheets of light have been found on the wings of planes, on propeller tips, sometimes on the windshields. And if you could imagine what that would look like, that would look scary as anything. It might have something to do with static electricity. I'm not sure how it's produced. Well, the next effect is weather balloons. This seems to be a standard answer of the government for sightings, weather balloons. Now, I have a picture of this, of several pictures actually, and weather balloons could look like flying saucers, and they could look like UFOs. Whether all the sightings are that is another question. Then we have planets. Planets, as my experience showed, if you don't know what you're looking at, you could be seeing something you thought was a flying saucer or a UFO. It took me a while to identify that what I saw was Venus and Mercury, and if I didn't know what they looked like and their location relative to each other and where they would have been at sunset, I wouldn't have known that. So that's another possibility. Atmospheric effects become another one. Twinkling stars. You see stars twinkle. Planets do not twinkle. Stars do. And there are reasons for that. Stars twinkle because of the atmosphere. The atmosphere will move around and it will bend light just a little bit and shift it and give a twinkling effect. It can actually make it look like the star is moving. It can also change the color of stars. And you'll see a star change from white to blue to red. I've seen that. And if I didn't know what it was, I would say, wow, what's out there? Then another explanation, which I don't accept too well, is birds. I mean, if I couldn't tell a bird from a UFO, I would be in bad shape. I don't know, maybe if a flock of birds was up high enough, you couldn't tell the difference. But that doesn't sound like a good one. Another explanation is hoaxes, and there are some. There are people who try and produce UFO photographs by throwing a hat up into the air or a disc or something like that, and then photographing it. That makes it hard to find out scientifically what's going on. And then the final reason given for these things aren't there is that the sightings, some of the sightings that have been recorded violate the laws of physics that we know. And they do. For example, some of the sightings say this light was standing still, and all of a sudden it took off at astronomical speeds. Now, if that is a physical object, when it goes through the sound barrier, it will cause a sonic boom, and these booms aren't heard. Another one is that some of these things, traveling at high speeds, violate the laws of physics, and they're going like this and then 90 degrees that way. And driving a car, you know, you just don't make turns like that. That violates some of the laws of physics. What are my answers to these? I say everything that they have said could be true. All of those explanations could be possible. That people were not seeing a flying saucer, an ET at all. They were seeing all of these things. In fact, from the statistics I have seen, about 93% of the sightings are explained the way that you saw. But that leaves 7% that are not. And that 7% kind of gets forgotten. Then I would have a question of this. How can beings travel that great a distance? Well, our science fiction says you put them in hibernation for 30 or 40 years so they don't age, and then they're here. That's a very poor way of doing things. I would say this. Suppose a society were advanced enough that they have physics beyond what Einstein knew. Is that possible? Of course it's possible. Only a fool says we know all there is to know. That's what they said hundreds of years ago. We know all there is to know. There is no more. So if that were possible, then could that society be able to find ways to do things that violate our laws of physics? There's a possibility that that's true. My explanation, if this is occurring, I don't know if it is or not, but if we are being visited, how could this happen? It's what I coined the term fifth dimension physics, beyond time and space. Get into another dimension completely outside of what we know. Travel in that, whoop, whatever that means, and then beam me down, Scotty. Put me into space-time. So that travel could occur almost instantaneously. It is possible. We don't have the physics for it. Then I would ask the questions, how about verifiable sightings of airline pilots? I am a pilot. I've never seen one of these things. But I've talked to an airline pilot who has, and it flew very close to his plane. He was all upset, but he was not about to report it. It would affect his job if he did, so he did not report it. But then how about pilots and passengers who all see the same thing? And it's picked up on radar at the same time. That has been reported and recorded. That's pretty hard to explain as a hoax, or maybe the whole plane was drunk or something, and the radar operators were too at the same time and seeing the same thing. Not likely. Then how about Air Force pilots? I was in the Air Force. I know the Air Force put a good amount of time studying this. and then ultimately came out with a report that said their studies found nothing. Their studies actually said 93% of the sightings were explained. How about reliable witnesses like police officers who see things like this? There's just too much going on for me to accept the official government explanation. It bothers me. This is very unscientific, and some of the answers are very stupid. The Roswell one, for example, was. I'm going to talk about that in a later show because I investigated that from an astronomer's point of view and from an archaeologist. I studied archaeology in New Mexico, and I went to Roswell specifically to use those skills and see what was possibly there. But this part I do know. I have a copy of the newspaper that was released in which the base commander released a story that said they had a flying saucer, that it had crashed. I talked 4 years ago to the man that released the story, who was a lieutenant back then. He's old now, he was a young man back then. And he said the base commander told him to release the story, and he did. Then, one day later, a general came in from higher headquarters and said it was a weather balloon, forget it. And so the press forgot it. Things like that bother me. I don't know what happened. I will give some evidence of what's possible that could have happened that I found out there. But it's things like this that to me hold back science, hold back true investigations. Next time I will talk about Roswell. I will talk about an archaeological dig that the University of New Mexico did to try and find if they could dig up anything. I think you'll like to see it. So I'll say good night for now.